the events and the memories of more than a decade that today becomes history. Join us as we pass through time from 1970 through 1980, putting the past into perspective while preparing for the future. Stay with us as we present Super 70s Plus One, Decade to Decade in Music.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body.
The long and winding road.
Are the Beatles going to get back together again? No, I don't think so. And I think why they wouldn't is because they broke up 10 years ago.
The United States of America and the People's Republic of China have agreed to recognize each other.
Dion has been a definite asset as far as our career is concerned.
I pray that he would.
The American people deserve to have a vice president who commands their unimpaired confidence and implicit trust. For more than 2 months now, you have not had such a vice president.
What are your thoughts about going to school with about half and half white and black students?
I don't care. I mean, you know, the same people. People are people.
The single I put out is Do You Think I'm Sexy, which is, is not about me.
Happy birthday, America!
But Leroy was stationed down there at Fort Dix.
Let us remember that in these next 4 years, we're not going to work for one group against another.
Kelly has been sentenced to life in prison. The Army term confined at hard labor for the length of your natural life.
Here he comes. Here's Anwar Sadat. That applause you hear is from Israelis.
Support the difficult decision taken by the President on the rescue operation in Iran.
When I accepted your nomination for president, I hesitatingly, but I asked for your prayers at that moment.
Relive the music, the events, and the memories that today become history. An 11-hour music event, Super 70s Plus One, Decade to Decade in Music.
70s, 1970.
Apollo 13.
American and South Vietnamese units will attack the headquarters for the entire communist military operation.
I saw them.
We are required to carry on with the struggle for the liberation of the Arab territories occupied in 1967.
1970 welcomed new superstars James Taylor, The Carpenters, Elton John, and Bread. Paul Newman and Robert Redford opened in one of the 70s hottest films, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and introduced the decade's first #1 hit.
It was one of the first pictures that I had done.
Songwriter Burt Bacharach.
And there was a scene on the bicycle, Catherine Ross and Paul Newman. And the more I looked at it on the Moviola machine at home, the more it kept feeling like it should go to a song. And that's how that song was born.
In March, the San Francisco swamp rock band Creedence Clearwater Revival and John Fogerty scored with Lookin' Out My Back Door, their 7th million-selling single. In the spring, the Marlboro Man disappeared from radio and TV as Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel captured Grammys for Bridge Over Troubled Water, which stayed at #1 for 6 consecutive weeks. Soon after the release of their biggest hit, Simon and Garfunkel went solo. In May, singer Ray Stevens used Mrs. Eichler's second-grade class to sing his Everything is Beautiful. Ray Stevens.
I just sort of locked myself in the room in the basement with the piano in the house we were living in at the time. That's where I wrote. And I tried all kinds of different ideas, and nothing seemed to really sound like a hit until I found the little note I'd made to myself, everything is beautiful in some way.
Super Super 70s.
June of 1970, and Richard Nixon's historic announcement.
American and South Vietnamese units will attack the headquarters for the entire communist military operation in South Vietnam. This key control center has been occupied by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong for 5 years in blatant violation of Cambodia's neutrality.
June saw another withdrawal in the music world. The 60s superstar group that made it into the first year of the 70s called it quits. The Beatles' last song, The Long and Winding Road, was released in their movie Let It Be.
The long and
In July, Bread created a summertime memory with I Want to Make It With You. Lead singer David Gates.
The name Bread came off the side of a bread truck that came by at a very auspicious moment when we were trying to select a name. And I was kind of sitting on the edge of the bed one night, and the phrase came out, I want to make it with you.
Super 70s continues after this.
Super 70s.
In August of 1970, Edwin Starr pinpointed young America's attitude with Cyclomates were banned, and Karen and Richard Carpenter nailed down the #1 spot and 2 Grammy Awards as they sang Bacharach and David's Close to You. Writer Burt Bacharach.
Hal, David, and I were just very often writing songs with no specific artist in mind. We're just writing a lot of songs, and that was one of the songs that we wrote.
Super 70s Spotlight.
Woodstock comes to life again as a movie, and the world played the music of Joe Cocker,
What?
Sly and the Family Stone,
Let's welcome Mr. Richie Haven.
Arlo Guthrie, and the late Jimi Hendrix.
Thank you.
In October, Neil Diamond sang Cracklin' Rosie about a lonely man's date with his bottle of wine. Rock lost Janis Joplin, as many millions bought tickets to Love Story with Ryan O'Neal and Ally McGraw. And James Taylor entered the pop mainstream for the first time with his autobiographical composition, Fire and Rain. Producer Peter Asher.
Fire and Rain was not originally our first choice for the single. In fact, 2 other people had done cover versions of it before ours came out. We weren't really surprised by its success, but we certainly were not confident of its success.
After this, Super 70s introduces rock's first opera.
Super 70s.
In November, England's The Who popularized the refrain, "We're not gonna take it," from their heralded rock opera, Tommy. The hit single was known as See Me, Feel Me. John Entwistle of The Who comments.
I suppose to Tommy, See Me, Feel Me, it is the equivalent of Climb Every Mountain in The Sound of Music, or You'll Never Walk Alone in Carousel. It's caused that kind of emotion.
Remember, movies Gimme Shelter and Airport were box office blockbusters, and an Englishman named Elton John launched his career with Your Song.
It's a little bit funny.
Next hour, Super 70s presents Janis Joplin's biggest hit ever and talks with superstars Chicago and Helen Reddy.
Super 70s.
Kelly has been sentenced to life in prison. The Army term confined at hard labor for the length of your natural life.
Glenn Miller played
songs that made the hit parade.
didn't come from monkeys, you atheistic pinko meathead.
Publication of the Pentagon Papers has not, in my judgment, posed any threat to our national security.
I am today ordering a freeze on all prices and wages throughout the United States for a period of 90 days.
The big stuff.
I share the horror of all New Yorkers at the one murder of the hostages at Attica State Prison.
In 1971, rock turned softer and more melodic as ballads topped the charts. In January, Beatle George Harrison released My Sweet Lord, a song prompted by his Hare Krishna beliefs. Canadian protest singer Gordon Lightfoot released his biggest hit, If You Could Read My Mind.
Joe Frazier is still the heavyweight champion of the world. The ring is full of people now. Frazier's face is a mass of welts, as is Ali's.
In March, Janis Joplin's album Pearl was released posthumously, and her version of Me and Bobby McGee went to #1. Songwriter Chris Christopherson.
I got in a bind, and I couldn't finish it. And then driving to Nashville one day, it was raining, and the windshield wiper line come to me. And I remember I couldn't wait to get back to put it down on tape.
In April, the U.S. ping pong team took on China. Ugandan dictator Idi Amin declared himself president for life. And Three Dog Night, who named themselves for an Australian system of gauging how cold the nights are by calling them 1, 2, or 3 dogs, released Joy to the World. In a moment, Super 70s picks up with Gary, Indiana's young dancing and singing brothers.
Super 70s.
In April of 1971, Gary, Indiana's Jackson 5, discovered by singer Diana Ross, danced and sang their way to #1 for the 5th straight time with Never Can Say Goodbye. In May, the SALT I agreement. Anti-war demonstrations in Washington. New York rejected the Concorde.
Say, kids, what time is it?
Howdy-doody time!
And Buffalo Bob Smith revived Howdy Doody for the 70s generation. Also during May, the Rolling Stones reached #1 with a blues tune about the lusty days of New Orleans slave trade, Brown Sugar. President Nixon in June of 1971 opened trade with China. At the same time, jazz rock fusion band Chicago released their classic ballad, Color My World. Jimmy Pankow.
What happened was we started getting fired from all these clubs because we stopped wearing sharkskin suits and we stopped putting our hair in pompadours and we started wearing blue jeans. And so basically we were up against a wall. And
after this pause, Super 70s presents a rock and roll writer who wove the decade's biggest tapestry.
I think James Taylor and Carole King were the ones who paved the way for the solo artist, and that set the mood for the music of the 70s.
Super 70s.
Carole King's hit, It's Too Late, from one of the biggest selling albums ever, Tapestry, earned her 3 Grammy Awards and superstar status in June of '71. In July, James Taylor recorded Ms. King's You've Got a Friend, another Grammy winner of 1973. Producer Peter Asher.
You've Got a Friend was a song that Carole King wrote that we'd heard shortly after she wrote it. And I asked her if we could cut it, and she said yes, so we did.
In August, an Air Force officer's son, born Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., drove up the charts as John Denver. Bill Danoff, co-writer with his wife Kathy, explains how the song Take Me Home Country Road came about.
During that week that we worked with him, he came back over our apartment late at night after a show, and we were going to swap songs. And during that night, we finished writing a song that Taffy and I had started that ended up being Take Me Home Country Road.
Super 70s continues in a moment with Maggie May. Superstar Rod Stewart stayed at #1 with his uncompromising late-night companion.
Maggie May was not the name of the lady in question in that particular song. I don't remember her name. And I went down to a thing called the Beaulieu Jazz Festival, which was a huge castle in the south of England, where there's 5 or 6 jazz bands and all the well-known beatniks from all over the country gathered. There was about 10,000 of us. And that's actually how the story about Maggie came about.
Super 70s.
In October of 1971, a new pop star born as Stephen Dimitri Giorgio became Cat Stevens and rode along on his peace train.
Now